Howdy again everyone, and today it's time for yet another exciting new release from the Chinese Viltrox company, their AF 35mm f1.2 Lab. It's an autofocus full-frame lens, currently just for Sony E-mount cameras, although I'm sure it'll make its way onto other systems eventually as well. Its price will be $999 or £959 here in the UK, and I'd like to thank Viltrox for sending me one of these lenses for evaluation, although as usual this is a totally independent review. They haven't had any input into the video at all. As someone who really likes 35mm lenses on a full-frame camera, it's a bit of a dream for me to use a lens like this because of that fantastically bright maximum aperture. f1.2 is something really special on a 35mm lens. It gives you quite deeply out of focus backgrounds, noticeably more than f1.4, even though that focal length is a moderately wide angle, and that leaves you with some pretty unique photos and good performance when shooting in low light. Nice. The lens itself is big, as you can see. Hardly a surprise though, considering that maximum aperture. Its build quality looks and feels exceptional. The lens's body is made of metal with a lovely smooth finish to it. It's based on a metal lens mount with weather sealing around the edge for extra protection. There's also a USB-C port embedded in the mount for future firmware updates. All that metal makes the lens rather heavy though. It weighs 920 grams or just over 2 pounds. As you upturn the lens, you can hear and feel glass elements inside gently bumping around, something which I really don't like, but in all fairness, that's actually becoming the norm these days. At the rear we find customizable function buttons and an auto manual focus switch, and then there's a customizable control ring. It seems to be made of metal with a small switch on the side which lets you change between turning that ring smoothly or with clicks. If the ring is set to control your aperture, which it is by default, then those clicks happen 7 times between each f-stop, which is really strange. I didn't like that. To get it into automatic or camera controlled mode, simply turn the ring all the way anti-clockwise for a while. Also, it defaults to controlling aperture on the lens at f1.2 whenever you turn your camera on, which is annoying if you only like to shoot in A or camera controlled mode. So personally, I'm tempted to disable that control ring altogether. Anyway, then we get a screen. Both Viltrox and occasionally Nikon like to feature these little OLED screens, and they're far more ornament than use, but they do look very cool and give you some nice information. This lens has Bluetooth and you can update its firmware, adjust settings, and even reprogram that screen by connecting it to your phone through the Viltrox app. You can even make the screen display your own custom images on startup. On my own phone it didn't connect properly, but that's probably because my phone's about 7 years old now and barely works anymore. With a more recent Android or iPhone, you should be fine. Then comes a metallic manual focus ring, which turns lovely and smoothly, and as you can see here, it works very responsively with a focus motor. You can also see some rather heavy focus breathing here with the image zooming in as you focus more closely to your subject. The lens's autofocus motor works silently and accurately. In single shot autofocus mode it's fairly quick. Switch over to continuous autofocus mode and it works just a little smoother and more confidently. When I first started using the lens it would occasionally miss focus, but after 100 shots or so that occasional problem seemed to go away and it focused fully accurately, perhaps just a new lens breaking itself in. It's a better performance than its 135mm brother in my experience. The lens has a 77mm filter thread size and it does not feature image stabilization. It comes with a simple but quite nice quality plastic hood and a faux leather carry bag. Overall, the lens's build quality is very lovely here. I liked its OLED screen, even if it's a bit of a gimmick. I much prefer the aesthetic design of this lens to its older 135mm brother, and the more extensive use of metal is a nice bonus as it feels very high quality too, even if it makes the lens rather heavy. I still didn't completely jive with its rear control ring though. I'd much prefer just a normal physical aperture ring. Well, anyway, let's look at image quality. I'll start by testing it on a Sony a7R III camera with its full-frame 42 megapixel sensor. In camera corrections are turned on for this test. At f1.2, sharpness and contrast in the middle of the image are fantastic. Stop down to f1.4 or f2 for minuscule improvements that lead to razor sharpness. You might not be able to see the difference, to be honest, on YouTube without a big 4K monitor. Anyway, back to f1.2 and let's look in the image corners. Corner image quality is obviously softer, but in all fairness, not too bad. You can still clearly make everything out. f1.4 looks the same, but f2 looks sharper and clearer. f2.8 looks about the same, but at f4 we get another improvement, and at f5.6 the lens is razor sharp from corner to corner. The lens stays this sharp down to f11. It's only at f16 that softness really creeps in due to diffraction. Overall though, this is a great performance. Sure, those corners could have been a little sharper at the very brightest apertures, but they're plenty good enough for most normal people, and the lens has plenty of contrast and no real colour fringing either. Nice. So let's see how it performs on an aps-c camera with a smaller 24 megapixel sensor. At f1.2, sharpness is very good in the middle, although we also see a touch of ghosting on a horizontal plane, which eats into contrast a little. Just like on full frame, at f1.4 we see a nice improvement, and at f2 we get razor sharpness in the middle with perfect contrast. Anyway, let's open back up to f1.2 and take a look in the image corners. Again, they are softer than the middle for sure, but not unusable. The corners stay this sharp down to about f4 without any real improvements, but at f5.6 we finally get perfect image quality from corner to corner. Again, the lens stays this sharp down to f11 where some softness from diffraction creeps in. Overall, it's a good performance on aps-c, although you can get even sharper than this. Let's go back to full frame, turn off in-camera corrections and look at distortion and vignetting. Impressively, the lens shows almost no distortion here, just a very slight moustache wave where the designers have corrected its barrel distortion, nothing you'd ever notice without using a test chart. At f1.2 the image corners are quite dark, unsurprisingly. Stop down to f2 or f2.8 to see those corners brighten a little, but you'll always need to add some peripheral illumination here. Still, kudos to Viltrox for correcting the lens's distortion optically, instead of simply relying on in-camera corrections. Next, close-up image quality, and with a minimum focus distance of 34 cm, the lens offers you decent enough magnification here, which can leave you with some rather dramatic images. At f1.2, the good news is that sharpness and contrast remain impressively high, although we are seeing a little purple fringing. Stop down to f1.4 to see it slightly reduced and contrast slightly increased, and at f2, that purple fringing is totally gone. And now, work against bright lights. Okay, it's a somewhat below average performance here. We are seeing some flaring, but more concerning is a clear loss of contrast, but it's only really when those bright lights are directly in the frame. Stop down to f2 as I do here for a small improvement. While we're working in the dark, let's take a look for coma and sun stars. Even at f1.2, coma smearing is very low on this lens. Stop down to f2 and any kind of smearing is now gone. Let's zoom out again and look for sun stars. At f5.6 they are beginning to emerge. Stop down to f8, f11 or f16 to see them get nice and big. Sweet. And now, bokeh. The quality of this lens's out of backgrounds is pretty important here, as it's the lens's key selling point. Out of focus backgrounds look nice and smooth though. Specular highlights have just a slightly hard edge to them and the typical cat's eye shape in the image corners, so it's perhaps not the softest I've ever seen, but those backgrounds are still really nice. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration, and at f1.2 it's easy to see here. At f2 it's reduced, and at f2.8 more or less gone. Overall, well, again, it's a great job from Viltrox here. The lens's build quality is lovely, but more importantly, it's a sharp optic with excellent contrast and quite smooth bokeh, not to mention an extra bright maximum aperture. It's not a cheap camera lens, but decent enough value, so if you like 35mm and you want to go big, then this could well be the lens for you, and it does come recommended. I'm so glad that full-frame 35mm f1.2 lenses are a thing now. The first one I ever tested was years ago from some random manufacturer called Curly. It wasn't a very sharp lens, but those images. Anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out the playlists on my channel where all these reviews have been carefully archived, and be sure to check out my Patreon page in the description below if you fancy supporting my work and getting some exclusive bonus content at the same time. Ciao for now, everyone.